welcome to the regenerative agriculture session. I'm very, very happy to have a number of friends actually in the room here. And it's I'm already looking forward to the first time we can meet in person again, but it's hopefully going to be soon. But until then, we are on the virtual ones, which is great in a way because we can all meet beamed into your living room or wherever you find yourself at the moment. When I was asked to moderate this session, I think regenerative agriculture was going up the hype cycle, and in the last few months, it's only been going better or worse, depending a bit on how you look at it. And I'm very happy to be joined by a number of experts, or let's say practitioners that have been in this space for a long time. And we're going to look at some of the hype and some of the things to look out for, as the excitement is just going to grow over the next months and maybe even years. But as we know, the hype cycle will go up, then will go down, and then the real work starts with building pieces that will last. And as all of it, what we're talking about here in forestry and agriculture, take time, especially when you look at regenerative agriculture. We are looking for things that are built for the long run and that are generating returns and cash flows in the long run. So I'm very happy to go to my panelists in this session. And what we're going to do is ask them to very briefly introduce themselves. There's a lot you can actually find online about many of them. But if you have never seen them before, I asked them to briefly introduce themselves in about 2 minutes or so. And then we're gonna basically go over a number of questions and open it up in the Q&A. So please share the questions that you have. I will try to get to them, try to point to people. If you have somebody in mind specifically, mention that as well. So we can do that. And I'm very much looking forward to an informal, but deep dive, an informal conversation, deep dive into Regen Ag. And with that, I would like to start with Gina. Actually, always women first. Gina Pattisson, I've known you for 4 or 5 years probably now, maybe even more. And I would love for you to briefly introduce yourself today, your role, your excitement, and then we're gonna go around the room. Thanks.
Thank you, Koen. And hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. So I'm Gina Pattisson. I work with Soil Heroes. I've been there from the beginning, working with front-running arable farmers in the Netherlands, who we're essentially now translating their vision of being able to reward farmers for building soil health. And what that means is connecting companies to the impact that farmers are delivering when they implement regenerative agricultural practices. Myself, I'm from a non-profit background predominantly. I started life in the FTSE 100 FMCG world on a fast track training scheme. So I've seen all parts of the business, commercially brilliant, very challenging in thinking about the relationship with small scale suppliers. And of late, in the last 5 years or so, I've been more working with impact investors. So now very much at the kind of sweet spot or intersection of how you mix non-profit and profit, essentially driving commercial viability through purpose. I hope that was brief enough.
Perfect. And thank you so much for that intro. And I want to hand it over to you, Daniel, of Quantis. We've known each other online for a long time, so I'm very. I mean, I haven't spoken to you as much as I've spoken to the other two, and so I'm very much looking forward to the interaction.
There's the room for improvement. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here, and yes, I'm Daniel Baertschi. I'm from Switzerland. I work for Quantis International. We are a sustainability consulting group, mainly working with big corporates like Nestle, Unilever, PepsiCo, etc., and focusing also on regenerative agriculture. And in my, let's say, non-paid life, I'm president of the association Agricultura Regenerative. This is an umbrella organization in Switzerland, uniting farmers, processors, traders, and consumers, and also input suppliers that are interested in regenerative agriculture. And basically, we support farmers with training and coaching to make this transition. And we also want to work on the market. So we are building up a brand in Switzerland that is really branding regenerative agriculture products. And the third part is really we want to work with, let's say, investors and potential partners to accelerate transition, especially supporting startups in terms of soil health monitoring, soil sensors, remote sensing technologies, etc. So we try to build an organization that is non-profit but brings profits to the farmers. and helps farmers really to make not only the transition, but also to have a benefit that is better than that was before, in a way that they don't want to return to the old system. I have a background as a farmer. I grew up on one of the first organic farms in Switzerland. I studied agronomy, and then I was for 8 years CEO of BioSwiss. That's the Swiss Organic Farmers Association, quite successful in the market with the BUD label, and also involved in IFOAM discussions about Organic 3.0. And I discovered regenerative agriculture through some books, interesting books by Joel Salatin, Charles Massey, and Gabe Brown. And I think regenerative agriculture is really the future, because organic will always be kind of a niche, and organic is about standards, and regenerative is about growth and progress. And that's what I like.
Thank you so much. And actually, don't go now, but Quantis published, I think it's the only LCA life cycle assessment on regenerative agriculture, together with Will Harris. There's a helicopter flying over here. So let's go to Fernando. And I will mute.
Thank you, Koen. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Fernando. I'm from Brazil. I manage a family office in Brazil called Progresso. And I started Meraki Impact in the Netherlands with the goal of managing what we call the deep impact part of our portfolio. And this is deep into regenerative agriculture. So I started into this with the goal of environmental impact. So especially how could we stop deforestation, regenerate what was damaged of our forests. I'm deeply involved with the Amazon issue. And then as I started diving into this regenerative space, I started understanding that biodiversity is not only about what's above ground, but also below ground. So now we have basically two lines of investments. We're interested in looking at technology to let us know how to assess what's happening, especially below the soil, how to allow farmers to get paid by the ecosystem services they generate, everything that is happening in the farm. And I also have my own farm project in Brazil. This is a 1,200 hectare farm that is traditional cattle, and we're now converting into what we call a future of protein system, which is integrating the cattle with agroforestry, especially around nut trees, and also with grains. But the nut trees are a very important part of the system. Well, that's it. Thank you.
And there's a lot more with all three, actually. And obviously, I forgot to introduce myself, which I always do in these things. I'm Koen van Seijen, and I host a podcast on investing in regenerative agriculture, which is literally called Investing in Regenerative Agriculture. If you're into podcasts and this type of conversations, definitely look at it if you want, and definitely reach out if you have any questions, etc. I have the great pleasure to interview many people in the space, to have many conversations and ask many questions, which is always very fun. How to put money to work, how to regenerate soil, people, local communities, ecosystems, and obviously getting a fair return. And that has led to, I think I just recorded episode official 120 plus a few series. So we're somewhere around 130. So it's quite a database of, at least we think, interesting people doing interesting things. And next to that, I'm a manager at Tonic, where we have a community, a global community of active impact investors. And there I'm facilitating the Regen working group, so the Regen Food and Ag working group. So also there I'm allowed to talk about soil and investing, which is obviously a great privilege. With that, I just got cut short because the helicopter coming over, but do find after this session, the life cycle assessment of white oak pastures that Quantis did, I think 1.5 years or 2 years ago, which was quite stunning if you look at the potential of beef production to be carbon negative and all the assumptions they made in that. And it's a fascinating deep dive into what is possible, what we don't know yet, and what we do know already. But that's homework for after. I would love to go around the room, basically go in the same order, definitely also like connect to each other, to the statements of each other, but want to kick it off with Gina. As we're going up this hype cycle, or first of all, do you agree that we're going up the hype cycle? Because it's an assumption or an observation I make. What do you see as the biggest risk and opportunity in Regen Ag at the moment, or let's say for the next 12 months or so? Where do you feel like, ooh, we should really watch out? And where do you feel like, oh, we should actually watch a lot more into?
It's a great question, Koen. And I've just popped out of hosting one of the dynamic discussion rooms as part of this summit. And interestingly, immediately the conversation was about quick solutions for the soil and quick money from carbon. For me, there you have it. There already is one of the biggest problems. So in answer to your question, yes, I agree. There's definitely an upward hype. There's, I mean, regenerative agriculture is now understood. It's a coined phrase. It's everybody's talking about it. Big statements. I mean, wonderful companies like Unilever and Danone saying we are going to making these commitments to regenerative agriculture. What that means is another question. However, what I do see and experience in day-to-day practice in the work that we do is this big danger of creating, it's like a gold rush. It's suddenly carbon equals money, and everyone's thinking of a single currency around one ecosystem service. I don't really like the word ecosystem service, but let's call it what nature delivers, natural capital. And when we start to take that mono view, we are repeating exactly the same problems that we are using regenerative agriculture to tackle. That is taking a mono lens rather than a diverse approach to building soil health. So I see the focus on carbon and the desire to pay for carbon credits as being quite a challenge. In terms of the opportunity, I think we have a massive opportunity. I mean, the world is listening, everybody is alert, and it's not like 20 years ago when people were talking about the triple bottom line, investing in nature. It's like actually the world has had a serious crisis, probably one of the most serious crises we've experienced in these generations, with the corona. I mean, literally planes stopped flying. No one thought it was possible. Well, it is. So we have this very short window of time. If we want to talk about build back better or change our systems, have healthy food, look at our public health bill, then we need to, I would suggest, take a step back and really review our intentions. Because when we look at our intentions, what am I setting my sales team to do? Am I asking them to ensure that they are building natural capital value in my company that makes a profit? Or am I asking them to sell? And on the side, we're going to regenerate some fields. So it's like, what's your true intention? Is it financially driven or is it nature driven? And I think if we can really have that different level of dialogue, then actually we have a massive opportunity to change the entire way that we grow our food and fuel globally, and save our planet, save our public health, and have delicious food at the end of it too.
It's an amazing vision, and I would love to see, of course, there's a helicopter coming over again. I'm in the mountains, by the way. That's why the background is interesting, and I think
We can't hear it.
Sorry. Let's go to Daniel. Same question. What's the risk? What's the opportunity?
Yeah, I fully agree with Gina first. It's really too much talking about carbon, and a lot of companies, they think that's the golden bullet we have to resolve, to reduce our carbon footprint, but we all know it's not that easy. I think what really concerns me is that there is a lot of discussion around regenerative agriculture without taking account the farmer's reality. I mean, talk to a farmer and you see that it's not that easy. I mean, they understand. In Switzerland, we have a lot of farmers, they really understand, they really would like to adjust their system, they really would like to go to regenerative farming, but the market doesn't really pay them well. And it's really kind of, well, you need to be certified to have a better price, and you need to give us the proof that you are better than the rest. So it's again the same trap as in the organic sector, where first it was a farmer-led movement focusing on health, focusing on what could we do for soil, for better foods. And at the end, it's kind of standardized corporate supply chain system, which I really hope we not make the same mistake. But then it's about diversity. How do we handle diversity? How do you handle diversity in supply chain, which is used to standardize? And I think that's one of the biggest risks I see, that big corporates, they feel that well, they want to step in, but they don't really understand the farmer's reality. And the former head of agriculture at Nestle told me, well, people in his company, they understand standards, but they don't understand growth, and they don't understand systems. Maybe that's a bit too black and white, but that just shows the problem. It's this disconnect from people between in corporates, from the soil and from reality of the farm level. And I really urge every CEO of a company to visit a farm and to talk to a farmer before they make bold plans about transitioning to regenerative agriculture. And second, I think the risk is really that there is a lot of money invested, but not invested in a good way. We'll come back to that later, I guess. But I think there is a lot of money just in a way paid for carbon sequestration. But that's kind of insane, because you pay the bad ones. I mean, a farmer that has built up soil for 30 years will not be rewarded if he continues the same way. But that one that has mined soil and depleted soil for years will now be paid to sequester carbon and to build up soil organic matter. And that's a system flaw. I think that's something we should not do. Of course, the big opportunity is that there is a lot of room for improvement, and it's exactly because it's not a standardized system, it's a growth path. And every farm can decide to what level they want to go and in what direction, and basically what's the timing. And what I feel what's important is also to work on the mindset of farmers. And there I see a lot of opportunities with younger farmers, with farmers without background growing up on a farm, but from outside, and just bringing new ideas, being very creative, very innovative, and having a direct connection to the consumers and being able to serve consumers directly. And let's say not just work with supply chains, but be more in charge of, let's say, making prices and not just taking prices. I think to be a price maker rather than a price taker is a huge opportunity we have now for many farmers. But to be honest, a lot of farmers will just not be able to make that transition.
Yeah, which is a great observation, and a huge issue. Like, how do we then transition many of the farmers? I mean, we're also active in Europe or based in Europe and in the US. And if you look at the average age of a farmer and the average land access that a young, let's say, aspiring farmer has, there's a huge gap between those. But it's also an investment opportunity, or it's where we can use finance as a transition to transition a lot of these acres or hectares to the next generation that might not be coming from a farming background, but has relevant experience and very different ideas, as you said, Daniel. And I would like to go to Fernando to answer those two questions, and also a question that came into the chat, because you are working a lot with tree crops and what's happening on the carbon side. But let's do that at the end of your, like, what do you see as the biggest risk at the moment, and what as the biggest opportunity? And then let's see if we can tackle the carbon offset in tree crops question as well.
Yeah, sure. Like for me, the risk is regenerative agriculture is becoming such a hype, and I start listening to like really large corporates using this, and it's just like a misuse of the label. And I think what we really need to understand is that regenerative agriculture changes the whole agriculture system in a way, because like one thing that we get with regenerative agriculture usually is biodiversity and a diversity of crops. And today our supply chains are built monocrops. So usually when I invest in a system, I have some few examples in Brazil, for instance. I'll be doing an agroforestry system in a cacao region. I only have a supply chain built there for cacao. And then what do I do with all the other products that this farmer is going to start producing? There's no supply chain for that. So we have to change the way we think all the supply chains. We also need equipments to be adjusted for this type of farms. We really, if you want to get off permaculture and scale this and do it large scale, we need different types of equipments to deal with this type of farms is different. And the most important thing on the lenses of investors, it changes the game of what is short-term, long-term, and how do we invest in agriculture. Like how we're used to investing in agriculture is usually short-term loans, everything. A lot of it is about annual cropping. So you just give these loans, you get the money back, and it just rolls and rolls every year, the cash flows. And when we start a really regenerative farm, like we're doing in Brazil, we have 6 years of a valley that we need to invest, and we need to wait for the system to be a little bit more mature. And then we move to a scenario where we have much higher financial returns. But until we get there, we need time and we need different types of financing to go in the system. And we really think at cash flows that go beyond 30 years if we have a timber component to a system, like a forestry component to a system. So this is the tricky thing. What I'm very optimistic about it is that people are realizing that this is a very powerful tool to mitigate climate change, because we have ways of regenerating a lot of biodiversity, and especially like on the example of cattle that I'm working with around the Amazon region. This is a major source of deforestation, so we can allow farmers to have better quality cattle, make more money out of it in a more intense type of cattle farming, because the cattle is in a more diverse system with a vertical pasture land, more so to say. So this is something. And then tackling your carbon question, can you repeat that, please? It's about the trees and carbon, right?
Yeah, sure. So the question actually came into the chat. How do you think about measuring carbon offsets of for tree crops? So is that the tree part? Of course, there's always the tree part and the soil part. And so far, I think we mostly always looked at the tree part and not so much. So in your project that you're doing with the silvopasture, is carbon part of that, for example?
Yeah, like we're hoping, like we created a whole financial model without the carbon, just because we wanted it to stay on its own feet, only with the products, only with the silvopasture, the agriculture, the livestock and everything. But we really believe the carbon is going to be a big source of revenue. We hope not only the carbon, we want to like the biodiversity to be. And of course, like we are using a lot of trees. We have timber trees. Most important in our system is the nut trees. So I see it's really important to shift from annual crops to perennial crops. Annual crops are still important. They are part of the system as well. The perennial, it's where we have a lot of gains. So I see that the future of diet will be eating stuff that we harvest from trees. So this is a big game changer. And then it's also easier to measure carbon when you have trees. But we want potentially, like we're working with Embrapa, the soil agency in Brazil, to be able to measure everything that's happening in the farm. But this takes investment and time. That's the challenge.
Yeah, no, I think very, very relevant you're bringing up diet change as well. Many people, I wouldn't say forget about it, but it's an integral part of we need to eat from landscapes, and healthy long-term landscapes have a lot of perennial crops. And thus we need to shift our diets away from a lot of things. And that's a long-term process, but it's definitely also an investment case. Like there's a very interesting investment case to be made to help all of us wherever we live to eat much more. I'm not saying 100%, but let's say a significant percentage from the landscape where we are active, and having a go at how far can we push that. I think it's an interesting challenge. I want to do another round of questions, and then we go. Definitely, we'll try to weave in a few of the questions from the Q&A already in this one. But I'm also very curious, as you're on a different part of the table, let's say, when we're talking about investments. Obviously, without giving investment advice, but I think there are a lot of people in this room that are either managing their own wealth or are managing wealth of others, either a large institution, smaller, etc. With your experience, what would you tell them to look out for? Like, people have read the books, they maybe visited a farm. I think that's the best advice you can give anybody. Visit farms, spend time, listen, and be humble, because there's a lot to learn. But what would you give, apart from that advice, which Danny already gave, starting with Gina, what would you advise, what would you suggest, let's say, to smart investors in this virtual room to do today, tomorrow, after the conference, the day after tomorrow? What would be your first step if you want to start seriously investigating and investing in this space?
Well, I'm sitting next to, in this Zoom room, a smart investor. That's Fernando. So I'm honored you come to me first. I was keen he would speak first. But I mean, I think at some very in the kind of the more fuzzy level, let's say, listen to your gut and really listen to your heart.
Literally, yeah.
Does it feel? Sorry.
No, listen to your gut. Literally, there's a whole health, food as medicine discussion.
There's a whole biome
we can have on biomes. Yeah, let's keep it on the fuzzy part. Yeah,
absolutely. But it's all interconnected. And listen to your heart. Does it actually really? Do you feel it? Can you connect with it? Is it actually matching with what your vision is of your investment intentions? I think then, in terms of looking at business case, I think it's really important in the first instance to be able to know are the people you're investing in, are they able to articulate what they are not doing and what they're not able to do and how they're addressing that? And I think in this bubbling space where everybody's talking, to be able to peel away the semantics and the language and really talk in practical terms, okay, so this is where I come in, this is what we're able to do, and we look for these partners on these aspects. And how does that fit within the whole community and movement of, I'm talking particularly from a regenerative agriculture perspective. So I think understanding the lay of the land of all the different actors and one's role within that is really important also. And then in terms of business model, I think it's very important to as much as possible, and of course I'm on the other side, so Fernando, it'll be interesting to hear your view on this, but to be able to, for a moment, lay aside your own metrics and expectations on the delivery of the business model, and really step into the shoes of the entrepreneur and the deliverer in this case, and hear their story, because it may be that within their context specific proposal, that actually there are some factors, I mean, like nature. Who can share here the rules of nature? Who actually understands nature's bill and how nature invoices us and what nature requires? I mean, it's really difficult. If we know about 40% of what's happening in nature, we're doing really well. So I think just being able to understand in the first instance how that business model is made up, and saying, well, hang on, where the 3 years is return, actually it's based on 7 years return, that's not realistic. Well, actually, is it realistic? What's the impact? And I think impact is there's a shifting dialogue towards really and I think there's some very front running, really entrepreneurial communities, you're part of some of them, that are really walking the talk around true impact, 100% impact, what impact really means. But you can't look at financial returns without understanding it within the context of the whole impact. So actually what you're delivering is not just money, it's so many other things. And so being able to understand that holistic lens that you want to apply to it. But that's on a kind of fairly conceptual level. I think Fernando might want to share more kind of specific
Let's go to Fernando. Yeah. What do you I think you have this discussion many times. What do you advise or suggest to your fellow investors that are, let's say, a few years earlier in the journey and look, Fernando, where should I start? It's so overwhelming. It's such a big system. Where do you even start looking? What do you normally tell them?
Yeah, for me, there's two very exciting ways of investing this. One is a pure impact-driven venture capital way, which is the technology that we need to make regenerative agriculture happen. And I'm really excited about a lot of things that I'm seeing in this field. So we're very close, and I mean in a few years, maybe less than 5 even, to be able to know the difference in terms of nutrition of a vegetable that is coming out of a regenerative soil, an aquaponic, a vertical farm, and a traditional chemical farm. And the day we do have that, and consumers have access to that, to traceability, then we start like really harvesting the value of what we're doing in regenerative agriculture. So today, still, unfortunately, we do the cash flow projections many times, not really considering all the premium that we might be able to capture with this type of farms. And when we're talking about farms, shifting the view from technology, everything that is happening on the farm, there's two ways of seeing it. Like, first, we are producing better quality, and there's a lot of like high yield crops that they go really well in this type of systems. So we're talking about changing the game of cocoa, for instance, that today plays the role of the villain of deforestation in Africa. I believe he should be the hero, and he has the biological potential to be the hero of regenerating what was damaged of our forests. Coffee is another interesting thing. Livestock is super interesting, everything that is happening. So there's a lot of things, and not even going into the superfoods and other things that we're starting to harvest, the farms that we're building over acai berry and other new commercial products. And then, okay, this is one part of the business, and also the farm level, the real estate play, okay? Like, I don't personally like to invest on funds that are like buying farmland from smallholder farmers just to make the pure real estate investment thesis game. But there's actually, when I'm doing this farm in Brazil, I know there's 2 layers to it. So I have a business case of the company that is producing high quality food, and I have the fact that I'm creating a much better farm. Like I'm really transforming a farm that was really close to erosion and losing quality of pasture, and turning this into kind of a really, really great asset that is going to be very valuable in the future, because it's going to be more climate resilient, and it's going to be more resilient to everything we're going to experience in terms of climate change. So I think that's another way of looking at interesting investment lenses.
Can I just add to that, Koen, before you turn to Daniel?
Not
to steal your turn, Daniel, but I think this whole point around building the internal asset, the internal value of a farmer's asset is absolutely essential. And when we can track that, we as Soil Heroes have developed a way to do that. But when we can track that, then you can start to have lots of very creative financial instruments that support the farmer and are very interesting for investors. I think there's lots of possibilities there. So I completely agree with you, Fernando. It's the layering of income for farmers from an investment point of view. If you can see the different layers that of income generation for the farmer through the increased product value, through the increased internal soil value, through the possibility to sell ecosystem services, then you know that the farmer is going to be rewarded more fairly. And there is also a more solid investment and return for the investor. Sorry, Daniel, I will.
I think it's a great point, and it's very interesting. There's a question in the chat on carbon credits, and it's interesting that Fernando says we build it without that, and we build it without the potential premium of nutrient density that we hope or know is going to arrive in let's say 5 years, or at least the way of measuring it. So I think there's a lot of potential upside we don't know, and I think if I can summarize at least those 2 answers, there's any flavor and risk appetite or any flavor of exposure you would like to have as an investor. We are probably in a space now where you can find things to invest in, from very, very steady, very low risk and potentially low return, like holding land, all the way up to very, very high tech and high risky technology, and everything in between, from food companies, etc. But I want to hear from Daniel as well. And if you, at the end or in your answer somewhere, what investors should look out for, can tackle a question that keeps coming back, and actually also in the chat this time, like let's with all your experience with farmers, does regenerative agriculture really have any impact on the soil? I'm just reading the question, because it plateaus and only stored until the field is tilled again. I think there's an assumption there that fields are tilled, which I think any serious regenerative farmer would think twice about. There are circumstances, but most of it, soil disturbance is a no-go. But what do you say when investors throw that out on the table? Like, I've read a report, or I saw a blog post somewhere that actually soil carbon doesn't increase with regen ag practices. What do you normally tell them? And then please share how that sentence continues after that.
As you always say, it depends. I mean, you can have cases where you don't have soil organic carbon increase, and you have cases where you have an increase. And I think that's just a problem, because it's just one element of regenerative agriculture, soil carbon. It's about soil health. That's much more important to me than soil carbon. Is the soil healthy, and can we measure health? And if I would be able to invest, I would invest in everything that helps us to monitor better soil and to monitor better quality, inequality, nutrient density of foods in a very practical way that is, let's say a farmer is able to do it himself, or a consumer is also able to do it himself. So that would be the investment case. And I think it's really, of course, if you build up soil organic carbon, if you do tillage, of course it can go back, but it's just the question: is it the main issue? Is it the problem, or is it just a temporary state that you have, and then you start to increase again? And it's more to have kind of a balance. I'm not really keen to have no-till farming everywhere, because it depends. It can be useful to have tillage at some point in time, but over time you have to reduce it. It's all about reduction and about finding the right balance. And it's important to keep the system in balance. So I think also from an investing perspective, everything that helps us to improve soil health in terms of products, that's a very important investment case, because we have invested a lot of money in products that destroy soil life. And we have now to find alternatives, because it's good to let nature work, but at some point in time you need to do some improvement. You can intervene with positive products. And there's a lot of compost tea experience in Switzerland. For example, farmers are experimenting a lot with compost tea, but for me it's just the beginning. There is much more in, and I would invest in everything that helps us to better understand soil health and to improve soil health with specific products, microbial based biologicals, also plant extracts, everything that is based on natural resources or natural processes. And not last but not least, I would invest in software, not in an IT software, but in the human software, in human mindset, human knowledge, and human training, because most farmers have been trained in the wrong way. They have been trained in a mechanistic reductionist way in agricultural training centers, in schools, etc. And we have to first clear their mind a bit that it's much more complex, it's holistic, everything is connected. And second, we have to inform them and help them to get access to better information and training and coaching, and get support, not just once per year, but just in time. So a coaching and training platform where they can access information in a very short time, and have the answer quickly ready, and being able to decide. That's would be a huge benefit, because I mean, transition is very risky, and to make decision, I mean, you can't go back and revise decisions. It's made and it's over. And so everything that helps farmers to make better decisions and to have a better projection of the future after that decision is very helpful. And therefore we need to have intelligent tools, monitoring systems, and also data management, data platforms that are hopefully open access and not owned by companies, but let's say kind of non-profit mode.
Thank you for that. And actually, well, let's tackle some more questions from the chat in a fireside mode. So Daniel, there's actually one, because you have the experience on what are your thoughts on organic certifications, and whether that's something you are considering as part of regenerative agri practices. You're mentioning you're actually building a brand now in Switzerland. So
Exactly.
if you very briefly could share, is it a certification? Is it a brand? Is it both? And what are your thoughts there?
Well, it's not certification, it's a brand. It's about transparency. And we really want that consumers can track back food to the farm and even to the animal it comes from. And they have full transparency about the production system, what the farmer is doing, but it's really not certification, because then you need standards. And as we know, regenerative agriculture is not about standards, it's about growth and about progress. And we want that every farmer can tell his or her own story to the consumer, and basically every farmer as a community of fans, of customers, of clients that are willing to support that farm in the transition, and not just looking for a certificate. Of course, that's a bit crazy, but we think that certification, that's the past, and in the future it's about transparency and about traceability. And we have, let's say, certification is based on old technology, old systems, and it's not fraud. I mean, you have fraud in the system, and I think that's a big risk, that if we go the same path, there will be fraud, and it will be very costly to keep the system clean somehow. And so I rather go for full transparency. For example, we have a system with QR, or we plan for a system that has a QR code on the package, on the product, and you can trace it back to the farm. And the farm is basically transparent about products. So basically we want really that they get rid of chemicals, for example, but they also can declare we don't get rid of herbicides, we just need herbicides for certain products. And then they are open and transparent. That is much more flexible than organic, because in organic, it's like pregnant. You are pregnant or not. There's nothing in between. And you can be organic or non-organic. There's nothing in between. And we know nature is much more diverse. And so we want to help farmers to let's say, to have the own path, own system they want to have, but able to be transparent and sell products with a high value.
Thank you so much. And one more fireside for Gina on biodiversity, actually. And I will tackle a question on the permanence of soil-based carbon offsets. I think there's an underlying, I don't know if it's the same person asking the question on tillage, but I think tillage is very misunderstood for many ways. And as soon as a farmer, let's say, is on the journey applying a lot of regenerative practices, there's no way he or she will happily till again, just because of the cost, because of the damage. So in this case, it seems a bit like, oh, we're paying somebody to not till, and as soon as we stop paying, he or she starts tilling again. And I think it's a very interesting underlying assumption that someone would start tilling if you stop paying. And in many cases, the farmer or the soil health will have improved enough, or if you're applying enough practices, you actually never want to go back to deep tilling, maybe some shallow one, etc. But the underlying assumption here, I would really urge the person that asked this question is to visit some farms, ask questions, and learn a lot about the why of tillage and the how of tillage and what can be done. But with that, I want to ask the last question very briefly to Gina, because somebody quite a while ago, when I screw up actually, asked on biodiversity, because we agree carbon is too simple, but how can we help? And it's easily measurable for companies, or sort of. How can we do the same with biodiversity? Is there a way to sort of inset biodiversity into supply chains or supply webs of companies, or is that a much longer answer we're not going to get through in a couple of minutes?
Short answer, Koen, to your question is yes. It's interesting you have a different nuance to the question, as it is exactly asked. Is that actually carbon is a simple currency, and it's not. It's a false currency, in my opinion. I think what we need to talk about is natural capital. And actually, when we look at building soil health, carbon is an indication of what is happening in the soil, but it is not everything that is happening in the soil. In terms of building carbon, so drawing CO2 and other gases into the soil and changing it into carbon, you must be doing other things in the soil. So that means that you are de facto increasing your levels of biodiversity in order for the soil cycle to go around. That means that you are therefore changing the structure of the soil, which means you're increasing the water holding capacity. The translation of a company's carbon footprint to the payment of carbon in soil is not real. If you look at true cost accounting, the amount that is paid for that carbon sequestered is just it's a figure, and it's not the reality of what the farmer is actually doing in order to improve the soil, that is possible. So if we can look more holistically at what does it take to restore a hectare of land, and if we can then track the cost of that. So in biodiversity, it's very simple. If you are going to include flower edges, we know the cost of the seeds, and we know how many square meters it's planted on across a field. So you can make a very real calculation there in terms of measuring it. You can also track how it's, I'm aware that these meetings pop out, so that I'm just watching the time. I've experienced it.
And I want one final sentence to close it off. So I'm looking at a clock as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to think holistically about companies don't just have a CO2 impact, they have a bigger impact. And if they want to take action, they need to look at restoring a whole hectare. And there are ways to measure that. There are ways to measure biodiversity. So the answer is absolutely, it's possible, and it should be done.
And I think they're front-running companies definitely pushing for that as well, which I would urge anybody, I think, to follow their lessons, it's a very humbling process probably, because you're going to find out a lot of things you didn't want to know as a company, but it's also very interesting because you'll find a lot of opportunities.
We have companies really excited by the fact that they are able to do more than just offset carbon. They don't want to offset carbon because they feel they're buying into a carbon market system where they actually,
I got an email of EasyJet today. Yeah, we're offsetting everything.
Yeah.
So I think $2 per ton or something. So they keep asking questions on it, visit farms and go deeper. It's definitely a rabbit hole to go into, but I want to end it with, let's say, Fernando, one final thing. What are you excited about this week as an investor? What is your most exciting meeting happening? Is there something that you want to can share here before we wrap up in, I think, less than a minute? So.
No, sure. Like we're starting to plant our first 10 hectares of the agroforestry system in the farm in Brazil. Wow. So that's really exciting. A lot of caju trees and
which I have no idea what they are,
heard about before. So it's going to be cool.
Super. And Daniel?
Well, I'm really excited that regenerative agriculture is now on top of the agenda in many discussions, and we can talk about, and it's a good start, even if we talk about risks and we know all about challenges, but it's a good room to start, and there's progress. That's great.
Perfect. Last word to Gina. Go ahead. 10 seconds left, I think.
Thank you very much, guys. I think we can only do it together, and more conversations like this where we put all the parts of the puzzle and fit them and we intersect investment with the reality of what's happening on the field. There is definitely huge possibilities, and it's very exciting. So
thank you so much all for joining this one. If you want to know more, you can definitely find more on all the speakers online. There are some amazing books, documentaries, but nothing replaces visiting farms, visiting farming teams and spending time with them to listen and to really go deep. And you'll be if you haven't done it recently, or you haven't visited a very advanced, let's say, farm that's applying a lot of regenerative practices, a very complex one, I think you'll be in for quite a surprise, which is only good. And this is a long-term game where we're just at the first inches of this marathon. So get ready for a long ride, which is where finance comes in. So I want to think we're at 16. I think this is a wrap, and I think we're going to move to the next session, and hope to see you there. Thank you guys so much for your time, and for all of what you have shared and all of what you're doing in the space.
Thank you, Koen.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.